Game 6. We are back talking about it. It is me and the microphone. Bringing you right up to lock 45 minutes to go, talking about this evening's contests. Talking about the ways, the shapes, the forms, the coaches, the players, the numbers. Speaking of numbers, the preliminary numbers are in for today's excellent Ku Klux Klan rally here in Dayton, Ohio. Apparently, there was something like approximately 2,000 counter-protesters, 700 law enforcement, and 10 actual members of the Ku Klux Klan protesting in attendance. After considering many things, I did not choose to attend and counter-protest or offer hugs or take pictures of the Klansmen next to Pokemon using the Pokemon Go app, which was admittedly the most tempting option. There seemed to be just something inherently wrong about justifying the existence of people who have really already been relegated to the dustbin of history and just haven't figured it out themselves yet. So if shit goes full Charlottesville around here and there's 20 next year, I will be there, sign in hand. But at this point, much ado about nothing certainly seemed to be the case, which is certainly better than the alternative, and disappointing to see things of that nature come here to Ohio, but nice to see that it didn't get more traction. Speaking about being relegated to the dustbin of history, Giannis, ever since being guarded by Kawhi Leonard over these last 3 games, has struggled mightily, and it's probably he has not been terrible. You could certainly look at this last game and see that, the core numbers were decent. He had 24, 6, and 6. Now, 6 is an abnormally low number of rebounds, just like the game before. 23 was an unreasonably high number of rebounds that would normalize somewhere in the 11, 12 area when he's going to play 39, 40 minutes, and, would have netted him closer to the low 50s in fantasy points we expect. Obviously got a substandard performance out of him by any reasonable judgment. Interesting to note that he was still in the optimal lineup on DraftKings. So Giannis having his worst game by far of the series and having a pretty disappointing game. He was outscored by Brogdon. On DK, I think the scoring differential made Broggy Pants end up with a higher number to be the highest scoring buck on DraftKings. On FanDuel, I think Giannis still held it by like a point. But he, along with Brogdon, was still in the best possible lineup on DraftKings. On FanDuel, I'm curious if he was still in there. That one I don't recall offhand, so I'm going to go look. He was not, and that doesn't surprise me. And while I wouldn't be shocked to see additional adjustments, and we can talk about a couple of those, more of today's show will end up, I think, revolving around, we got the news last game, with 8 or 10 minutes to go, that Brogdon, who I already liked previous to that point, was going to start, and so that worked out very well, where he was 20% owned and went out and put his thing down. That's a slightly higher performance out of Brogdon than I would expect, but nice to see him start and get all that time. Came largely at the expense of Mirotic, who we certainly thought might take a further haircut, and that certainly came to pass. But what's interesting looking at today's slate is how it is relative to the others, in that there's not really great value anymore. As recently as Games 4 and Game 5, we had, again, talking primarily about DraftKings, but the same certainly holds true when talking about FanDuel, some pretty good value. You had, $3,400 George Hill when we expected him to play 30 minutes or more, and you had $4,400 Norman Powell when you expected him to play significant amounts of time. Most of that has dried up today on both sites. And that makes certainly the pairing of both of the superstars in this series, of Kawhi and Giannis, more difficult. It really makes you struggle with those secondary options. Unsurprisingly, as the minutes condense a little bit as the series goes on, most guys' price rises appreciably. Some of them not that much. Pascal Siakam's price on FanDuel fell by $1,000 since the last game. That feels pretty good. Like going back there at $12K. Brogdon only went up $200. I do think getting 42 fantasy points out of him is higher than my expectancy for him. I have him closer to the low to mid 30s. But good to see that that's possible. That ownership will come up. But maybe not so much. But so to talk about the basketball a little bit more, those who are hating on Giannis, and I'm a pretty big Giannis fan, both for the fact that he's very, very, very good, but beyond the fact that he's unique. I really enjoy unique players. I enjoy big guys with a great skill set. I enjoy guys who are uniquely athletic. I don't like reducing basketball down to, these are the ways you're supposed to play. These are prototypical basketball players and what they can do and should do. And Giannis is historically unique in his approach to the game, which comes from his historically unique skill set for a guy of his size and his strength. You heard I like big guys. That's true. It is the weekend. So. But if you are in the hating on Giannis crowd, you should be gratified by the last few games because he has not made the best decisions. He's not bad. Okay, we're judging him on a really, really high scale here, and Toronto's defense has been underrated the whole year, and they're remarkably solid all the way through. But Giannis hasn't made the best decisions when put into difficult situations, either by being A, doubled, or B, having Kawhi Leonard just not allowing him to operate the way he's used to operating. And one of the things you'll get out of LeBron, Kobe, to pick a guy who deals with that situation was when you stack him up, he makes you pay for it. And Giannis does a decent job at this. I'm not saying he's bad, and it's a pretty unique skill set to acquire because not many people have to deal with it. There's not a ton of players in the NBA who have to deal with frequent double teams. But there are guys who deal well with frequent double teams, or just lock down defenders and manage to get around it and still be productive, or at least keep the team productive. And there are guys who struggle with it. There's been guys for the last 10 years, you'd put Tony Allen on them, and they would fold in the face of the grindfather. So, Giannis has been fine, hasn't committed ungodly amounts of turnovers. He's had a couple bad games where he turned the ball over a lot. But he hasn't managed to make the Raptors pay for stopping him, and that's what you have to do. The situation has to be like, okay, you have to stick Kawhi on me all the time, and I'm going to make you pay for not having Kawhi on anyone else on the damn court, basically. And the extent to which they have stuck... Sorry, I keep gulping in the lake. I'm actually a little bit sick, but gonna tough it out and do the show. The extent to which they're sticking Kawhi on him is remarkable. In the last game, for example, again using the second spectrum numbers, which gauge who guards you in a possession based on who guards you most in that possession, Giannis was guarded most by Kawhi Leonard at 37 possessions. Second place was Pascal Siakam with 10. That's huge. That is a disparity you almost never see. A guy getting to half is pretty rare in the modern age of the NBA. This was, something closer to 65% of his possessions. Kawhi Leonard was his number one. Now, there's a couple external reasons for that in the playoffs. Everyone's playing more minutes. Again, these guys played, I think Giannis played 39 in the last game. Kawhi played 40 and a half, 41, somewhere in that range. But those are remarkably lopsided numbers. Now, there's things you can do to free him. You can get better screens out of guys. You can get, Brolo to do a better job setting that screen. You can do things as a coach, as an offense, to try to free up Giannis more. But it makes this weird three-step offense that is difficult to execute and takes a lot of time. And again, this is a team that is really trying to run. I could throw a pile of stats at you about who's scoring more in the first 6 seconds of the clock versus the remaining 18, but or half-court defense, offense, fast break points, so on and so forth. But the long and the short of it is the Raptors have excelled in the half-court, and the Bucks have done pretty well in the fast break and pretty poorly when they set up. Their half-court offense has been bad, legit bad. Not bad by this standard of Giannis passing out of double teams we were just talking about badly. And that's why it becomes even more of a... they get even more screwed when Toronto starts making their shots. When they start banging out threes and you get the Fred Van Vliet game and all that going on, everything slows down. Missed shots, they get out and run. Made shots, and that's another statistic you could look at it, which is basically going to tell you the same story, is that when the Raptors miss and they bring it up, the Bucks are scoring something like 1.15 points per possession, as opposed to if the Raptors make a basket and they bring it up, they score something like 0.95 points per possession, which are all a lot of ways of telling you the same story. Now, the Raptors have shot better than I expected them to, especially when you expurgate Mirotic in favor of Brogdon largely, who, looking at his possession numbers and just the eye test on the court, still appears to be defending at a very good level. I'm a big Broggy fan. This is their system is different. Again, I'm a Budenholzer fan, but if you had an issue with Budenholzer, it would be his being one of the last holdouts to the modern NBA's trend of everybody switching a lot. They don't switch a lot. They switch. I would be shocked if they're not bottom 3 in the NBA in switching. I don't know quite how I would judge such a thing. I'm sure there's a way with, after crossing half court, who picks up which offensive player percentage of the time no one else sees that offensive player. I'm sure there is a statistic I could look up for it, but just based on reading and listening and watching, they don't switch a lot. Now, they've done it more in these playoffs because they haven't had they've had to, really. Toronto was simply making them pay too much with screens, especially at the top of the high post, to not make that adjustment. But if you're looking for a reason to criticize Budenholzer, it's the fact that this team doesn't switch that well, and it's caused them to have a couple holes in the defense. We look during the year, and you're like, man, you can get games against the Bucks out of Klay Thompson and Devin Booker and other guys because they can get beat on pretty simple screens. And that's happened a couple times in this postseason. Again, they've stepped up their switching frequency to a more tolerable level to my eye, but that continues to be an issue. This long way around being that I was talking about how exceptional the Raptors defense is. The Bucks defense is filled with really good defenders. Giannis is in the top 1, 3, 5 defensive players in the universe, wherever you choose to rank him, but he's really good. Brook Lopez is much better than you would think. His rim protection has gotten really good. He's, that you get him out at the three-point line trying to guard Kawhi, and he gets clowned a little bit, but it's not like his ass was falling down. Brook Lopez is pretty solid. I really like Brogdon. George Hill is an excellent hand. Eric Bledsoe is incredibly underrated as a defender and can take plays off and make mental mistakes, but he's also really, really good. But the Bucks defense in general, and this is an oversimplification, is not as good as the Raptors defense, and that's one of the reasons why. And that's basically how they've lost 2 of these last 3 games, was they just allowed the other team some open shots, and the Raptors decided to make them on that day, and that makes their offense that much worse, and it all spirals from there. I could just talk about the series for a long time, but let's let's talk about the game a little bit. Important to talk about the coach's comments on minutes. Basically, Budenholzer flatly shut down one of the reporters who asked, what do you think about running Giannis out there for more time than he's been getting? And again, we have already seen more time out of him. Giannis, during the regular season in fantasy, was a player we weren't that as excited about as we could be, even though he was averaging close to the most fantasy points per minute of anyone playing significant minutes in the entirety of the NBA. He didn't get that many minutes. And part of the reason was they had a very good and deep bench. Again, during the year they traded, brought Mirotic in. The bench changed a little bit over the course of the year. And obviously it didn't hurt them as they ended up with a 60-win season and looked great for the majority of the year. But he's always been a little shyer on the minutes than other coaches, which previous to the playoffs, when you still manage to, win your conference, you're obviously doing just fine. But in any case, he's basically said that you're not going to get more than 40 minutes out of Giannis. Maybe you get 41. Maybe you get 42 or something like that. But he specifically said, what did we give him tonight? 39? I really can't see giving him much more than that. and goes on a long speech basically saying, I think he becomes less effective. He's obviously expending a shit ton of energy on both ends of the court. I think he needs the rest we're giving him. So take that as you will. I have him for 40 minutes right now. I have Kawhi Leonard for 44 minutes. Nick Nurse came out and said it's a whatever it takes game, I think was the exact quote, and said that it was a, quote, unlimited minutes night. We have seen even in non-overtime contests 44 and 46 in that 76er series out of him. We saw obviously 52 in the double overtime in this series. So right now I have Giannis for 40 minutes and Kawhi Leonard for 44 minutes. And based on that and the trends in their production and just correcting things a little bit, I actually have them projected within a fantasy point tonight. I still have Giannis higher by half a fantasy point. And it's going to be really interesting to see where the ownership lands tonight. If we went back and looked at the last slate, we talked about it when it locked, and we had Giannis at, I think it was 93%. It might have been 97. I can't remember now if it was 97 or 7 off of 100. But Giannis was phenomenally owned. And it is worth pointing out, and I will say this again, we're 5 games in this series. Giannis has been in the best possible lineup on DraftKings all 5 games. Kawhi has only been in it 4 games. Giannis was captain twice. Kawhi was captain once. Marc Gasol was captain once. Brook Lopez was captain once. On FanDuel, it's still pretty easy. The best scoring player of the night has been the MVP every time. It's as I've said in the past. It will happen every. I'm pulling numbers out of my ass here, but frequently, but certainly not the majority of the time. Maybe every 5th game. Probably more than that. Anyhow, on FanDuel, it is incredibly unlikely the guy who scores the most points on the night is not the captain. It requires some really weird shit to happen. Now, we're approaching those conditions with value on FanDuel being so shitty. And let me specify about this, and we'll talk about DraftKings in a little bit as well. But Fred VanVleet is really the only value guy you look at and shouldn't feel the slight urge to vomit. I mean, it is ugly. Assuming you don't predict a blowout, which, again, when the stakes are this high, how much blowout time is there really going to be? Like, for there to be an extensive blowout, they have to be up 35 with, 7 minutes to go to get 7 minutes at a blowout, guys. So, at 6,000, you have no one. You have Sterling Brown, who made an odd cameo last game for 4 minutes. Okay. So there's really nothing at 6,000. You have Pat Connaughton at 7,000. I doubt that works out for you, especially when you have Fred VanVleet at 7,500. Now, Fred VanVleet was depressingly terrible for quite some time. Emac was crying in his Diet Coke, I'm sure, every single day, but has obviously improved vastly over the last couple of games, and in this last game most notably played 37 minutes, largely at the expense of Danny Green. That is a butt ton of time. He made 7 3-pointers, shooting 7 of 9 from 3. But it should be pointed out that, again, this is not the world's best matchup for him. He also took 13 shots, which was the 3rd most on the team. The shot totals for this team were 25 for Kawhi, 15 for Pascal, 13 for Fred VanVleet, 11 for Lowry. So he took 13 shots. So anyhow, I'll put it this way. He had 37 minutes. I'm going to guess that number comes down. I don't have any real gauge on this. There is a chance Nick Nurse is like, Fred was great. We're sticking with Fred. Fred's getting 37 minutes no matter what. But that was 24 for Powell and 19 for Ibaka and 15.5 for Danny Green. I suspect those other numbers more likely to increase in Fred VanVleet's 37 likely to come down. I think at the start of the day I projected him for 32. But that still feels pretty good when you're really the only reasonable value guy on FanDuel. I expect him to be chalky. But that is a lot of time and a lot of shots. But it should be pointed out, he can be pretty deficient other than scoring. He had 21 real points and ended up with 26.7 points on FanDuel and 29.25 on DK. He played 37 minutes. He had a rebound, a assist, I suppose an assist, and a steal. Obviously no blocks. No turnovers, which that's nice for taking 13 shots and touching the ball that much. And again, made more than half his shots and made 7 of his 9 threes. Point being, if you give him that number of minutes and that number of shots and play that time again, I would probably project him for 2 more rebounds, 1 more assist, but I'd also project him for 4 less 3-pointers. Maybe 3.5 less 3-pointers. So I suppose there is an argument to be made, what is really the ceiling here? So drawing this all back to talking about FanDuel, yeah, you want the highest scoring guy there, even with everything that's going on, but it's starting to look like you may not be able to afford second highest scoring guy at your 1.5x all-star spot. So I'm gonna build a hypothetical lineup here, and again, I'm not advocating this lineup, but I sort of wanna. It's worth pointing out also Giannis's price has come down by $500. It's supposed to on DraftKings, where Kawhi is actually more expensive than Giannis, which is fine. They're very, very close, and then I have them projected very, very close. And again, the ownership will be fascinating. On FanDuel, where it was 18 to 16 for Giannis to Kawhi as far as salary goes, it's now 17.5 to 16. But let's say you take Giannis and Kawhi as your top 2 spots. And then we'll go with Pascal Siakam, who obviously has a ceiling. We've seen a nice ceiling out of him a couple times. Had a nice bounce-back game we talked about last series. Let's put him in third. I've now got $7,250 less. If I start with Giannis, Kawhi, and Pascal, $7,250 per spot. So I have to play someone awful. I can fill that in with... it's also worth pointing out that there's no one leading up to 9,000 as the less of this. You have Pat Connaughton at 7,000, who I mentioned is, I guess he's not entirely out of play, simply because there are scenarios where the top 4 guys are so exceptional relative to the other that you're going to want him at 7 as opposed to one of the guys who's probably going to score 15 more fantasy points than him at 9. It could happen. It would be weird, but if you got 68 out of Giannis, 63 out of Kawhi, 52 out of Lowry, and 51 out of Chris Middleton, that if that is what lets you stick in, and again, that would still be too much salary, but if something like that, then you had Pat Connaughton getting 10.8, that could hit, so he's not out of the realm of possibility, but you don't like it. Fred VanVleet at 7,500, going to be popular, but he's really the only playable guy you really want to play under $9,000. Ersan is playable. I shouldn't say he's not playable. Ersan is $8,000, and it's worth pointing out. That's all the guys in this range. VanVleet, 75. Green, 75. Ersan, 8,000. And then you're into this collective of guys in the 9K range. So, I guess my point being there, purely based on my intuition, I have a feeling your best possible lineup tonight is a little more likely to contain either Giannis or Kawhi, and not both on FanDuel. Because you can then play 5 good guys as opposed to 3 or 4 good guys and hoping to not be as shitty as you quite possibly could be at the end of your lineup. And lineups feel a little more settled in stone, and minutes are a little more dense, so it feels even less likely that I'm going to randomly get there with a guy who hasn't gotten there the entire series. So, I don't know if I want to go any more on FanDuel. We'll call that it on FanDuel. Then talking about the same situation on DraftKings, again, as recently as the last couple games, we've had some pretty exceptional value. I still like Norman Powell at $3,800. I don't like him as much as I liked him last game and George Hill last game. But prices on dudes have started to climb a little bit. It's not nearly as bad on DraftKings. I am perfectly happy playing, as in guys I'd like to play and really have no reservation of playing in your lineup. Norman Powell at 38, George Hill at 4,000, Serge Ibaka at 4,400, VanVleet at 48, Brook Lopez at 52, Marcus All at 56. Those guys all work, and I think, and I'm just going to tap in real quick here because I don't remember what it was like when I built it earlier today, but if I go with, I think you can build a much more tolerable lineup on DraftKings running both of the big dogs out there. So let me tap through some things and just confirm my suspicion here that you don't have to run any super dicey what the fuck am I doing value. No, you don't. All right, so DraftKings, I would probably espouse a converse theory that likely you're still going to want to have both of those guys in there. I think it's important not to overreact to the Kawhi is God, Giannis is terrible theme that is going on Twitter a lot today. Kawhi obviously had an incredible game. Was not as supremely efficient as he was for many games earlier in the series. Giannis, again, that rebound number was suspiciously low. That's likely going to come up. And again, I should point out, he was still in the best possible DraftKings lineup. I think maybe I had, when I was looking at it in preparation for the show, the captaincy tab up or something. That doesn't really make any sense either. But upon further reflection and looking at the prices on DK, yeah, they're really not that bad. They're not as good as they've been, but George Hill at 4,000 still feels pretty exceptional. Norman Powell at 3,800. Obviously, the minutes coming down to whatever it was, 25 and change last game, and all the minutes going to Van Vliet is a little concerning, but that is still not a lot of money for a guy who has a very easy 35-point game in him and a very easy 30-minute game in him. So, DraftKings, I have a feeling that one lineup I am playing Giannis and Kawhi. FanDuel, I have a feeling that I almost certainly am not. Other things to talk about. Eric Bledsoe was very weird last game. So if we go look at Game 4, they deployed Eric Bledsoe radically differently, and I didn't have a problem with that. And he played 30-something minutes. He still wasn't great. It was good for him. I think he shot 6 for 14, but 2 for 7 from 3. And his shooting has been a real problem. You can pay some asshole with fugly hair like me to talk about the series for a long time, but a lot of it is just hitting shots. Bucks are shooting like balls. Danny Green, Mirotic, even the guys who are supposed to be, crushing, aren't doing great. But Bledsoe and this team is not making shots. Now, they're playing a very good defensive team, and there's obviously, it just does not exist in a vacuum. But the Raptors have had, one more good shooting game, and it kind of ends up talking about the series a whole hell of a lot there. So Bledsoe, in any case, Game 4 was reduced down to he was going to play 23 or 24 minutes. He played 6. He came out and didn't play in the last, whatever it was, 3 minutes of that game, which were hyper blowout minutes. But had played 3.5 minutes and left with 3 minutes to go in the game and might have closed the game, I don't know. But even if he had closed the game, he was going to play like 24 minutes and never more than 4 minutes in a stretch. Went back to his old rotation last game. I don't know. A little strange for me. But Budenholzer, to a certain extent, accepting that one Game 4, has really stuck with his guys who brung him to the dance, if you will. Let's see. But that was really curious for me. So I projected him for 29 minutes, which is what he saw for the first 3 games of the series before he randomly was going to get 23 in the blowout, before he then got 33. I have very little confidence in that number, but I'd have him out of there. You don't need him, and he's just not doing enough. You can run. The addition of putting Brogdon in instead of Mirotic means you can run 35 minutes of George Hill, who has played extremely well, and Brogdon cumbersome, and you can play 19 minutes of Eric Bledsoe, and I think you're going to do better. If he could shoot, it's a whole different thing. But you need to surround Giannis with shooters. It's like this year's Lakers team. I and everyone else who's ever watched a basketball game watched the Lakers' offseason moves and went, you need to put shooters around LeBron. It's pretty easy. He demands double teams and gets into the lane, and people need to help, and just the whole defense gets flustered. Then you throw it out to, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. That one works. But, let's go get Lance Stevenson and Rondo and people who generally can't shoot the basketball is a weird thing. You need to surround Giannis with shooters. Not necessarily every guy, but as many guys as possible. It's one of the reasons why Brook Lopez had, career year. All right, so we'll get into some questions. Guess you're going back to Middleton. He's so inconsistent. Yeah, Middleton was curiously disengaged in that last game. He had a triple-double except for the points. I think if you put a gun to my head and asked me to guess, I would say in his career, regular season and postseason, that is someone can look this up, by the way. It's probably a complicated stat news query, but that is the first time that Chris Middleton has had 10 rebounds, 10 assists, but not 10 points in an NBA basketball game. That would be my guess. That was pretty weird. He still ended up being decent, but I think he shot 2 for 9. I'll go back to the box score, but yeah, he shot 2 for 9. He missed both his 3, so he ended up with 6 points, no steals, no blocks, 2 turnovers, 10 assists, and 10 rebounds. That's a weird-ass box score out of Chris Middleton. But yeah, Bucks shot distribution, and again, it's to specifically comment on the rotations. The Raptors condensed down to the 8 guys that they're basically running. Their starters. Fred obviously got a giant pile of time, taking it mostly from Danny Green. Norman Powell got his 24 minutes. Serge Ibaka got his 19. With the exception of, I expect Danny Green to get a little more than he got. I have a feeling that was extreme as the haircut got. I expect Fred to get a little less. I expect Kawhi to get a little more. He only played 40 minutes in that game. I do think that number comes up. If you're Nick Nurse, you don't want to go back to Milwaukee. You want this done now in front of the home crowd. I could talk about every guy here for 10 minutes, but I'm wondering if there's, and for those of you watching the show for the first time in the postseason, I apologize, but most of you have seen somewhere between 1 and 5 of my, talks about all the guys on these teams, and it seems kind of silly to go crazy. So I'm just going to go straight to questions. Okay, here we go. Middleton will be fine today. He was fine, but he was fine there. I said, at yesterday's show, I said I had him, Lowry, and Siakam all pegged closest. I think I had Siakam highest by a fantasy point, but they were all in 34 to 35 fantasy point projected range. And Middleton and Lowry landed right in there again. Siakam had a very good game and got on top of that. Thoughts on this? Huey298, looking at your lineup, I think it's great. I have no issue playing that lineup. Fade ABC, he is trash. He's so good. He's so good. He's not traditionally good. His effect on the basketball court, as measured over years, is one of the greatest ever. He was just incredible this year. Admittedly, he has trouble when guarded by one of the best teams in defense and absolutely sat on by probably the best individual defender in the world. It's a conversation if Paul George is healthy and a couple other guys, and do you throw Rudy Gobert in that conversation, etc. But, when you are literally guarded by Kawhi Leonard in playoff mode 100% of the time, and you struggle to, I think we should guard the guy a little more for him. I have no knowledge of Greek's ankle being in any way significantly impinged. I'm not worried about that. They'll hop him up on whatever. Gasol and Powell, or Lopez and Fred VanVleet on DK and a GPP. I'd play Gasol and Powell. They both have an upside. We didn't get the biggest Powell game last time, but he's still obviously well cheap at $3,800 on DK. A lot of people have moved off him, so I had a similar price. We were getting him at 50, 55, 60% owned. That number's going to be 34 today because so much of it flows to VanVleet, and he could obviously have the game today. So generally, I'm going to like Powell more than VanVleet in tournaments. I think I may actually... No, I have VanVleet projected for one more fantasy point, but I haven't projected somewhere, and the ownership would push me to Powell a lot. Brogdon and Hill, or Bledsoe and Lopez on DraftKings? Yeah, I probably run Brogdon and Hill. Certainly feels safer. You're going to get some really nice ownership on Bledsoe and Lopez, for what it's worth. What do you think about how Siakam was the last time the Raps were in a closeout game versus Philly? He looked scared to shoot. That's a small enough sample size. I didn't take that into anything, and I don't take it into anything. He's had big moments in tough situations as well, so I just think that's... Also, that was, a couple games removed from his leg injury. I think that factors into it a little bit, but I'm not worried about his state of mind. More DK points today, Brogdon or Lopez, Gasol or Middleton. I have Middleton over Gasol by about 5. That one's not terribly close for me. I like Gasol in tournaments. Again, you're a little more removed from his big game, coming off a shit game. His big game came in Toronto. He's played better at home. I like Marc Gasol quite a bit at the DraftKings price. The FanDuel price, you can obviously play him in tournaments. It's a one-game slate. You can play anyone who you think is going to play significant minutes. And the ownership there is going to be obviously a lot nicer because he's, after the big two, the most expensive guy on the slate. Somewhat curiously. There's lots of weird... Oh, Pascal Siakam had a big game, so they lowered his price $1,000. Marc Gasol was shit. His price went up $500. I don't know quite what's going on with the algorithm there at FanDuel. It may involve a dartboard. But yeah, that happened. But I have Middleton for, again, in the 35 range. I think I bumped him slightly after rewatching the last game. And I have Gasol closer to 30. So raw points, I have Middleton there. Brogdon and Lopez I have pretty close. Brogdon is a much better sort of cash play. Lopez does have a higher upside. We've seen it. And again, it wouldn't shock me to see it again today. The reason that we didn't, manage to get that last game is that Giannis didn't manage to make the Raptors pay for sticking Kawhi on him the entire game and for, doubling him as he gets closer to the basket. The handles weren't quite there. There's a whole thing where if they can stop Giannis outside the 3-point line, the Bucks half-court defense just falls to shit and they lose all the individual matchups. If Giannis can get the ball with any sort of motion at the top of the key, then it's an entirely different game, and they're just stopping him far enough out. With Brolo, Ibaka, and Fred VanVleet on FanDuel with the big two, what are your thoughts? I think it's fine. Obviously, ideally, we don't want, Ibaka and Siakam or Ibaka and Gasol. There's some negative correlation there. You obviously can do it. It's one-game slate. You can largely ignore that sort of correlation, but if you're building simply one lineup, I think you generally kind of enjoy it. But if you play the big two in some order, you can then play Brook Lopez, Serge Ibaka, and Fred VanVleet. What are your thoughts? I think it's chalky, but fine. It's sort of a more cashy lineup. Obviously, we did well on Ibaka last game. He was super popular, both sites at his price, and I was pretty under him, and he didn't get there. And just his role in the rotation is a little bit uncertain, and the ways in which he accrues fantasy points are a little uncertain too. He can be really low usage. He can pick up some blocks, he can make some three-pointers, but you can have really low-scoring games out of Serge Ibaka, so he's just fine to play. And I'd rather play him today than I would have last slate because he's the same guy and he was just coming off a big game and the ownership spikes. So is today's edge on DraftKings going back to Gasol? He's still too cheap for the kind of ceiling he portends. So yeah, that's certainly a guy I'd want to be over on. The ownership is going to be really fascinating. Again, last slate we had mid-90s on Giannis. We had Kawhi coming off whatever game, and again, his injury was much more of an issue going into that last game. Even at still somewhat cheaper than Giannis, was only 73% owned. On FanDuel, Giannis was 80 whatever, and Kawhi was 43% owned on that last slate. So it's going to be really interesting to see what those ownership numbers bump to, but I think we can expect Giannis to come back down into somewhat reasonable numbers, especially on FanDuel. FanDuel is really interesting because, again, the value is really bad now. I think I slightly prefer playing either a really nice all-around lineup with Kawhi and no Giannis, and that, can still work. We know Giannis's minutes are going to be limited. He's close to 100%, but might be a little bit banged up, and the upside is to some degree marginalized by just having Kawhi draped over him all game. So, how much do you lose if, he needs to have a great game in a really difficult spot at that price, which came down $500, but at 17.5 with no value we love, or I guess I still like Fred VanVleet at $7,500. So with one really chalky piece of value that we don't hate, it's starting to get awayable. Is Danny Green at captain going to win you $100,000? Almost certainly not, but if Danny Green has a good game, having him at captain is going to be pretty key. Lopez at captain with Middleton or Brogdon as captain with Gasol? I'm trying to parse that question, Touchdown. Got it. Okay. So Captain Lopez with Middleton or Captain Brogdon with Gasol. I would probably play Captain Lopez with Middleton. When you're going captain with any of the non-stud guys, you need a monster. You need him to give you the mark. And we had two. We had a Marc Gasol game. We had a Brook Lopez game. I would buck, no pun intended, on the second Lopez game before I think you get a game that exceptional out of Brogdon. I like Broggy pants, but you need a monster. You need like a 50 raw. That's, believe it or not, maybe a little more likely out of Lopez, and the ownership is going to be much, much better, which again, you're trying to grab 100K with that sort of lineup. So nothing wrong with either. I have them pretty close. I would probably slightly go Lopez as captain with Middleton, who's another guy a little more likely to spike and upside, over Brogdon and captain with Gasol. 17 new Twitter notifications. I'll browse. Lowry or Brogdon? Yeah, I have them projected almost identically. I would probably play Lowry for what I am guessing, and we can check this in a minute. I would probably play Lowry because I think he'll be lower owned than Brogdon, but they're both... It's not only do I have them projected almost the same, they project almost identically as far as their range of outcomes and their delta. So slightly prefer Lowry there on my presumption that he is lower owned than Brogdon if the salary is moot for your question. And again, we will check that out in a second. Someone mentioned there might be some overlay, and that's obviously the greatest thing in the world. Other than a mutton, lettuce, and tomato sandwich where the mutton is nice and lean and the lettuce is fresh. And ooh, I love that. But if there might be some overlay, let me go look and see that. Nothing significant to speak of on FanDuel. Let's see. Take that, sort by that. There used to be that really nice site that, yeah, there's a $15 tournament on DraftKings that is 426 out of 784 with 2.5 minutes to burn, 2 minutes and 20 seconds as of the speaking. I think I'm delayed 10 or 15 seconds. I'll vote against overlay, but also against fill. So I suspect that won't quite fill. I'm going to be close. But I'm going to guess that won't quite fill. But they're not creating any new tournaments to sort of drive people to it. So now 444 out of 784. I'll keep an eye on it. I'll give an update in 1 minute. A couple other comments came in there. Between Brogdon and Gasol, who would you put at that third spot for FanDuel and GPP? Gasol for me. The ownership is going to be lower. I haven't projected for less raw points by a few than Brogdon. So take that into account, but I do expect the ownership and existence in that spot to be significantly lower. And so for that reason, yes, I would put, if I'm playing Gasol, if I'm paying the 13.5 for him, yeah, I'm going to put him in that third spot and really try to get the juice out of him there. All right, we are down to a minute 15. Yeah, that tournament's at 512 out of 784. I suspect it'll end up in the 650 to 675 range, which would actually be just a touch of overlay, but it's going to be around rakeless. Although they literally are opening no new contests, so all there is now is that and a couple of satellites. So, we'll be interested to see how it goes. 45 seconds to go, 545 out of 784. I'll keep an eye on it as we get up to lock. Alright, 20 seconds to go. 627 out of 784. It's a $10,000 15 to enter contest on DK. 639, 650 with 10 seconds to go. 670, 687 with a few seconds to go. So last flash, that's going to fill about 700 out of 784. So that one contest will rake 2% as opposed to the full 15 or 16%. So thank you to the kind gentleman in chat who pointed that out. Let's go ahead and take a look at some ownership on a couple of things. Alright, there's... Alright, I don't think it's the main contest, but it's only entered in a few. I guess maybe FanDuel filled early. The person whose account this is did not get into everything. So, on FanDuel, Kawhi Leonard, 75%. Giannis, 69%. Yeah, that's, I still want Kawhi on FanDuel at those prices. It's close, but $1,500 is pretty significant there, and 6% more. I haven't projected pretty close to identically at this point, but not that surprising there. What was our question? Marc Gasol and Brogdon? Malcolm Brogdon, 35%. Marc Gasol, 14%. So, yeah, that's why I want to have the multiplier on Marc Gasol. If I'm bucking on a performance out of him, might as well. Let's see. Norman Powell, 19%. That feels pretty good. Chris Middleton, 25%. That's too low, although obviously that last game was disappointingly low usage. Ibaka down to 19%. Brolo, 40% on FanDuel. Let me click another lineup to find a Van Vliet. 54% Van Vliet. Yep, fully expected him to be the third highest owned player on the slate after the two studs. Let's look at DraftKings. I think I saw it entered into some of the big stuff. 500K again. Strong. I think there's actually a cicada or other insect of the chirping variety in my my studio here in the basement, which is aggravating. Alright, so some numbers. Kawhi Leonard, 89%. That's really funny. Let's find Giannis. 87.5%. Okay. Yeah, none of that is shocking. So, Eric Bledsoe, 22. That feels pretty good. Marc Gasol, 54. Wow. Okay, so people did not go for the pump fake there. They stayed down. Malcolm Brogdon, 44. Brook Lopez, 30. Kyle Lowry, 40. Nikola Mirotic, 8. Bold soul. Danny Green, 12. Bold soul. And the Cicada is a great name for a band. Yeah, it's a really shitty 40-ton BattleTech mech as well. Pat Connaughton, 9.5%. I still find that on the too cute side, unless there was some, we may give Pat Connaughton extra time today comments out of Coach Bud that I missed. I don't want 10% owned Pat Connaughton. 2% owned Pat Connaughton, I'm getting in there. FanDuel, where there is literally no one playable at his price or less, I get it. DK, 10% still too high. George Hill, 50. Yep. Pascal, 30. Kawhi, 90. Giannis, yada yada. 54. George Hill. Okay. Well, there it is, my friends. We are off. I will be back possibly for Game 7, but if not before then, for the first game of the NBA Finals, which take place on the 31st. If you haven't noticed, there are massive contests. DK has a $2.5 million contest with $1 million for first. FanDuel has I think, just $1 million contest for that. Lots of tickets out there, I know, in the community, because I've gotten like 6 requests from someone like, how much would I have to pay to build 100 lineups for me? It's pretty funny. Trying to stifle a sneeze. I think I'm losing the battle, though. I think I got it. Willpower, baby. Okay. For the NBA Finals itself, I will be joined by your own Rinpack. From chat. It's going to step into the booth with me, give me someone to bounce some ideas off of so we get back into the finals myself. And Ryan, also known as Renpack in the premium Slack chat and on the Twitter sphere, will be together talking about the action for you. So this game has started. Milwaukee out to a 3-2 lead, 52 seconds in, and I am going to go watch that basketball game. So, my friends, it has been a pleasure as always. See you in 2 or 6 days, I suppose.